One of the biggest mistakes, one of the biggest concerns when you're ready to debate is that you haven't put enough thought into the wording of the topic. In the competitive debate world, which is global, every country in the world has its own kind of competitive debate that they have students do, or they have collegiate leagues do. There's an inordinate amount of time put into the phrasing and the formation of topics. One of the things you're going to have to do in this class is come up with topics. And in order to have a good debate, you have to have a well-worded, well-thought-out topic. A lot of your frustration about the debates you have in everyday life with your friends, or even if you try to set up a good debate with friends about sports or food or music or whatever you'd like to debate, they probably become frustrating precisely because the topic isn't properly worded for the debate that you want to have. There's no right way to word a topic, but there are tons of wrong ways to do it. That's what we're going to talk about, debate topics and your desire to have a good debate. So the confusion starts right here. All of these words mean debate topic. Topic, the question. You often hear different debate organizations talk about what the question is, or here's the question that we're determining tonight. A good debate topic is never a question. More on that in a second. The issue, the controversy, the resolution of the motion. The last two are two different legislative tradition ways of wording it. And the one I didn't put on here from legal studies would be the charge. What's the charge? Or what is the indictment, maybe, if it's a criminal thing? Or what is the injury? What's the case? The resolution and motion come from legislative traditions. The resolution is more American, so anything in front of the congressional body will be resolved that, blah, 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 or be it resolved that. And then motions are what they call in parliamentary systems, the things that they're going to debate. Let's take a look at some examples of different ways you can frame a debate. All these are very similar. The very first one at the top is the question. That might be the question that inspires you to want to have a debate, but how you word it depends on very differently on what kind of debate you're going to have. Look at all these different topics. Which one of these is the one you want to have? Now, if you just put the question up there, you're going to miss all of the specifics that you would want to have if you just want to argue about whether Michael Jordan is, or Jack Nicklaus is, or Michael Phelps, or Tom Brady. Of course, the list goes on, and if you just had the question there, you could talk past each other. Somebody could pick Serena and say Serena is the best athlete of all time. And then someone else could pick, I don't know, somebody from football, from soccer. I don't know anything about soccer, so I didn't put an example up here about that. But you could talk past each other the entire time. So be very careful about how it is you want to frame it. This example shows that the question is so broad that you might think it might make a good debate, but you can talk past each other about two different people and never engage each other. But if you focus it on one person and say yes or no, the responsibilities for that debate are much clearer, they're much cleaner, and it's a much more satisfying debate to have, because at the end of it, you'll have a sense of whether or not Michael Jordan or Tom Brady is the best athlete of all time. Let's take a look at three different motions that I've written here, three different topics. And you'll see that none of them are a question, but they might be inspired by the same question. But there are differences here, and I want to talk to you about what the differences are. The greatest athlete of all time must be determined by examining more than just their sports ability. That's the first topic. What do you think about that one? I don't know. It is a lot more difficult to play baseball than American football, and great athletes must also be great people. What are the differences between these three topics? Do they call upon us to do different things in order to have the debate? Well, in the first one, the greatest athlete of all time must be determined by examining more than just their sports ability. Sounds kind of meta, doesn't it? Maybe it feels like it calls upon some past examples to see what a great athlete is, and it's more than just sports ability. The second one, I don't know, they'll come back to that first one. Second one, it's a lot more difficult to play baseball than American football. Well, that seems like a comparison, right? So you would have to say, what is about baseball that's difficult? What is it about American football that's difficult? And also, most importantly, is this hovering begged question. The begged question is a fallacy, but it's often a mistake more than a fallacy, more than something tricky or some way to deceive. It's mostly just not preparing properly. So you have to determine what it means for something to be difficult as well. What does it mean for something to be difficult? How do we know something is difficult? And it calls for the definition of that and comparison. And then the last one, great athletes must also be great people, is going to really revolve around what does it mean to be great? And how do we know whether somebody is a great person, and how do we know someone is a great athlete? It depends on what you prioritize. So what we have here are three classic examples of the three types of motions you can get, which all have different obligations to them. The first one on this slide is a policy motion. So what it's asking you to do is it's asking you to come up with a way of doing something. What's the method? What is it that you're going to defend as the action that you're going to take? And it calls you to set out a policy. So it's called the proposition of policy. The second one is a lot more difficult to play baseball than American football, is a proposition of value. Value means comparison in context. So we have to determine what difficulty is and how we know, and then say which one are we going to value as more difficult. I know that sounds weird, but which one are we going to value as more difficult than the other one? And then the last one is proposition of fact. Great athletes must also be great people. We have to look to the past, and although that calls for definition on what it means to be great, we look to examples to prove that one rather than some kind of comparison. Although, of course, in the debate we can compare and say whether or not someone's truly great, but that's an argument of definition rather than which one do we find superior between these two things. So that's the way I would break those three down. And as you kind of think about this and look around the world, you'll determine whether things are fact, value, and policy as they go. So propositions of fact require definition and lots of examples. They're usually about the past. Propositions of value are things that are about comparison and about contingency. What do we value in the situation, and how do we know what's important? And because we know what's important in this situation is X, we will always hold this thing above this other thing. And that's how those debates are framed. And propositions of policy are, how do we fix it? How do we fix the problem? What should we do? Should we change what we're doing? Should we start doing something new? These kind of considerations are propositions of policy. So here's how to determine what to do when you've identified a proposition of value, factor, policy. Or also, this might be a way of identifying what you have. Propositions of fact ask you to prove something is true. You're going to do that through information, historical, otherwise, research, and prove that something is the case. It requires definitions. Every debate requires definitions, but this one requires examples in the past and information to really win the debate. The second one is proving something is better. This requires you to be able to articulate why we would value one thing over another given a certain situation. So propositions of value are always contingent. They're not really based on things like facts or scientific quality of evidence, but more of like, well, we hold all these values at the same time. Why would we prioritize this one? And why would the prioritization of this one means that we would rather praise this more than we would normally praise this other thing? And then policy is proving something should be done a certain way. A lot of times in a policy debate, there's lots of agreement that something needs to be done, but the fight is about the particularities of it. For example, when you think about the climate debate, a lot of people, very, very, very few people, don't think that we should do anything about climate change. Among the people who think we should do something about climate change, there's a huge debate about whether or not we should fundamentally alter our economy, or whether we should just put more anti-pollution standards on cars, or whether we should become vegans. So there's lots of different particularities in those debates about how, and that's the hallmark of a policy debate. Policy debate's about what are we going to do in specifics and why are we going to do it. Okay, so I just talked about climate change and I forgot, this is the next slide. What do we do about climate change? Now this sounds like a good debate topic is, what should we do about climate change? Terrible topic, because everyone can just talk about their own thing and never engage each other. One of the most important things in a topic is establishing clash. So let's look here and see. Human action can't stop climate change. Well, what is that one? Is that fact, value, or policy? What do you think? Human action can't stop climate change. I believe that to be proposition of fact, because it's asking us to prove something is true, and we have to look at evidence, hard evidence, different kinds of examples and proof to either prove that statement true or false, and that indicates it's a fact motion. which is a fine debate to have. You might not like that one, so let's go to the next one. Acting against climate change is essential to preserve society. Okay, now this one seems like a policy maybe, because it's saying act against climate change. It seems like maybe it's fact, but this one is, what do you think? This one is value. And the reason it's value, and this is going to be controversial, you're going to be like, what? The reason it's value is because it's saying that it's using this term essential. So it's trying to provoke a measurement, a comparison. So is it essential to act against climate change to preserve society? And so you could say, well, no, it would actually be more essential to do this other thing. It all hinges around how do we know something is essential and what does it mean to be essential? And then in this situation, how do we know it's essential? So it calls upon us to bring our values forward in order to determine if we should act on climate change or not. Acting against it, whether it be successful or not or work, is irrelevant for this debate, I would say. But acting is what's important, and what's the value of acting against it, even if it's not going to be that effective. Well, it keeps society together. Well, maybe we don't want to keep society together. We can have that debate. Okay, the final one. Major polluters, such as governments, the military, and multinational corporations, should be forced to reduce their emissions by 75% or more. This one doesn't require a lot of thought. This is policy because it's asking for very particular action. Okay, so you see the difference there. Now, as you can see just from this one example, I mean, climate change is, there's really no bigger topic, right? But you can write all kinds of different debates that would focus on getting different kinds of aspects examined, rather than just having the very frustrating, exhausting, and disorganized mess of everyone talking about what they want to when you say, what should we do about climate change? Not a debate topic. An inspiration for a debate topic, though. Another example, ripped from the headlines. How should we handle COVID-19? Now let's think about these topics and see if we can determine what our obligations are in each one. Mask mandates might keep people well, but they do a lot of harm to individual liberty. Wonder what that one is. That sounds like something somebody would say. Try to make these very realistic. It seems like that one seems like comparison. It's kind of on the fence, but I would say it's probably safer to treat this one as proposition of fact. So you could make the arguments that individual liberty is being harmed, define harming, and then talk about health and whether or not they keep people well and whether that cost is worth it or not. And that would be the way you would argue that one out. So that one becomes proposition of fact because it's about, is this true? The second one, scientific or medical research or advice should always be followed over popular will or government opinion in public health matters. Now that seems an interesting one, the will of the people versus what scientific evidence tells us. And we have to determine how we would know whether allowing people to exercise their rights or have particular kind of freedom is worth it in a climate where people are going to get hurt. And that's a classic value proposition. Are we going to look at popular will versus scientific truth? How do we determine which one to prioritize in this situation? So that would be a nice value debate to have. And the whole debate contingents on how you would, what you would value as to whichever one you'd put forward. Well, because as a society we value keeping people alive and healthy so they can exercise their rights, the mask mandate is something that always should be followed, or scientific information or medical information should always be followed, even if it harms rights, because that would be temporary. We can always recover rights, we can't recover health. On the other side of it, you could say that any threat to any kind of popular will or government opinion or anything people are advocating they should be able to do erodes democracy, and it's questionable whether we'll get that back. And that's the way that debate would play out. Once you give away a right, not getting it back. Last one. Restaurants and bars should remain completely closed until a significant portion of the population has received the first vaccine injection. Now, this one is pretty obviously policy. And what you would have to do is establish what the problem is and then establish a solution and why it would work. And more on that in the next video, but that is something if you want to debate what it is that we should do versus what it is that we should prioritize or value versus what it is that is true or can be proven true. We're not talking about truth in terms of timeless, it exists on its own accord, it is established without question. We're talking about proving something to say, okay, well, that's reasonably true. But the beautiful thing is we can always go back to anything we've decided is true, re-examine it, and determine something different. And that's the beauty of being a human being, is you're never stuck with any of these things. Okay, last example here before you go off and write some of your own. In the brief assignment, you're going to have to write your own on every brief assignment that we do over the term. You'll have to write your own topics, but it's a good exercise to try to do to see if you can figure out if you can write one of each. Stupid electoral college. Everyone hates the electoral college these days, right? I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe you guys feel differently after Joe Biden was elected. Maybe now it's a good thing, I don't know. But a lot of people really anti-electoral college these days, with lots of good reasons. So here's 3 topics. Let's think of which one is which. Electoral college should be replaced with a national popular vote. Well, that one is kind of easy, don't you think? What is that one? And that one is policy. And the reason why it's policy is because asking for a plan and saying this particular action would be better than what we're doing now. So the debate's going to hinge around why the national popular vote would work and what problem it would solve. Okay? Next one, the electoral college is racist. Now, that might be a very interesting debate to have, but what is that? I mean, racism, pretty easy to define, hard to define. It's very controversial about whether someone is a racist or whether a statement is racist or whether they are acting racist but might not be racist. All these things are very complicated. But in this case, this is fact. It's not a fact that the Electoral College is racist, but it's a fact-based motion which will require example after example after example to prove the case the Electoral College could be reasonably believed to be racist, which is about as close as you can get to the truth, I think, in any rhetorically governed kind of statement like this. And the final one, direct election of the chief executive is more democratic than proxy vote. Now that one is value. It's a process of elimination, but why is it value? Well, it's saying that direct election is more democratic than the Electoral College's proxy vote. So now it hinges upon what is more democratic and how would we know? And in this situation, this is more democratic than this because of what these things embody in terms of what they value, how they embrace the kind of things that we want. Now, there's no calling here for any kind of particular plan of how to do that. It's just an evaluation of which one is superior in terms of democracy. Democracy has to be unpacked in terms of what we value there. That is a basic introduction to topics, writing topics, and why topics have to be phrased a certain way. And that's because in debate, the topic gives us our responsibilities. Depending on what side we are, whether affirmative or negative, we have certain responsibilities in the debate. If the topic is unclear, worded poorly, or is a question, the responsibilities are not communicated, there's no direct clash, and people will make very, very good claims and talk about what they want to talk about, but there won't be any engagement. It'll be hard to evaluate the debate.